So I am going to be talking about gender in team science, is something I haven't heard discussed at any of the gender summits to date. So a new topic, if you will. Thinking about team research, not only the ability to transform research, but also the ability to have an impact on individuals. To give you an idea of where I'm coming from, I'm a microbiologist. So of course that makes perfect sense that I'm going to talk to you about gender in team science, because bacteria, of course, have no gender and not often working in teams. But it turns out that in fact, when one doesn't worry so much about how the career advances as much, you can do really excellent things in your career. And so I've spent about the last 7 years of my research career thinking about teams and people and collaboration. I think there's some challenges we need to be aware of. We know that both interdisciplinary research and team science or collaboration are on the rise. And importantly, not just that they're on the rise, but team science produces more highly impactful research than that done by individuals. And so from our perspective of innovation and research, that's a good thing. We also know that part of the challenge is that despite many decades worth of research and good intentions, we still have significant disparity between men and women in STEM careers. Otherwise, we wouldn't all be here. And we do know, right, that Horizon 2020, I'm very excited about, includes an explicit objective around focusing on gender balance in research teams. But I believe that there's still a significant paucity of research on gender and team science. And a point I don't have on this side is that even more so, there's a paucity of the application of this research to policy and practice. And that's something that we need to work on, knowing that team science produces higher impact research. There is an opportunity, though. The Horizon 2020 program and the National Science Foundation both offer up opportunities to fund research in this area. The Horizon 2020 program on gender equality and research and innovation has a particular call for impact of gender diversity on research and innovation, focusing on the impacts of gender diversity in research teams and therefore the quality of research and productivity. The National Science Foundation has programs that support research on gender in science and engineering, and the advanced program that we heard a little bit about from Wanda Ward earlier today. So I'm going to talk with you now a little bit about the evidence in this area, tell you and share a little bit about the research that we do know already, hoping to encourage some of you to think about extending this field and to get all of you to be thinking about how to incorporate this into your thinking around institutional practice and policies. So I'm going to talk with you about gender differences in research collaboration and what's already known from the literature, gender diversity and team productivity and performance, the differential variances that we have in gender between expertise, recognition, and then also talk to you about collaboration strategies and networks and where the differences are in the genders. All of the literature that I'm going to be discussing today is right at your fingertips as well, so you don't have to be a scholar in this area to be able to access the research. We have put it all into a Science of Team Science group on the Mendeley system. You can join this group for free right now, Mendeley Science of Team Science. And if you take the opportunity to download the free desktop version of the software, then you'll be able to go to the pre-made group called Gender and Diversity in Collaboration and Team Science, and you'll have the reference library right at your fingertips. Now, don't worry if you don't get all of this down. It is all included in my presentation, which you all have access to as well, and I will wait around and happily answer questions. And just in case you don't actually want to go to the Mendeley group or look it up, this slide is the summary of all of the literature that I'm going to talk with you about, and I do have versions of PDFs and everything if you wanted to just email me. All right, so first I want to talk about gender differences in research collaboration, and what do we know already from the literature. In terms of real or perceived gender differences in interdisciplinary research, we know that from research done by Diana Rotman in 2007, that there are higher rates of female collaboration in interdisciplinary research centers than might be anticipated due simply to the rates of the female membership in those interdisciplinary research centers, and that the collaboration of women in those interdisciplinary research centers is higher than that for men in departments quite often. However, the research demonstrated that women are participating more in formal knowledge-producing networks and much less in information-sharing collaborations, meaning, in short, that we're missing the old boys network. And because we don't have access to information in the same way as men, perhaps missing out on opportunities as well. Some newer research that comes from just last year, looking at cross-functional teams. We learned through a bibliometric approach that women researchers tend to register a greater propensity to collaborate in all forms of collaboration. So general collaboration, whether they're working within their own organization, whether they're working across institutional boundaries, but not so much in international collaboration. This is also a problem for women because international collaboration produces the highest impact research. So another way that we're being left out. Research that was done in 2008 recommends that women and other minorities have the ability to adapt and overcome challenges and barriers, and that might actually be something that we could use to our advantage. Underrepresented minorities, we're more likely to be risk takers and may do better in the context of teams that tend to be less conservative. So that's good, some positive news. Keep that in mind because it's about to get negative. All right, in terms of gender diversity and productivity and performance, looking at differences in scientific productivity and the lack of research collaboration. In some work done in the late 90s, researchers demonstrated by conducting some questionnaire-based research that teamwork in itself stimulates productivity, and women may be excluded from important networks, so their opportunities for collaboration in research are restricted. And it does appear that they are collaborating less in that way, and when they collaborate less, they publish less. And I'm fairly certain that in every one of the academic institutions any of us have ever been associated with, publication matters quite a bit. Women who do not collaborate were less productive, less publications. It turns out that this was not the case for men. Men did not need to collaborate in order to be as productive from a publication standpoint. They did also note that another factor in this research in the late 90s were that having young children were another productivity factor, one that weighed quite heavily on women compared to that for men. Some research that was just published last year, talking about heterogeneity on teams in relationship to the higher quality output, says that looking at citation rate as a proxy for scientific impact and quality demonstrated that gender heterogeneous teams produced articles that were perceived to be of higher quality by peers. In fact, publications with at least one female co-author tended to be cited 87% more frequently than those without a female author. However, they did also show that if the team becomes too homogeneous female, then the citation rate drops, which suggests that in fact diversity is important, and no, I'm not looking for women to take over the world. Okay, well maybe I am, but that's the hidden agenda. Some research that was published just a couple of years earlier said that in terms of diversity in team processes, team collaborations greatly improved by the presence of women in a group. And they're able to attribute that improvement to collective intelligence, the quality of social interactions within the group. Groups with women in them exhibit greater quality in conversational turn-taking so that all team members can be responsive of one another. Women are also more interpersonally oriented and tend to be more democratic than men on the team. In male-dominated professions, though, where women are more likely to be in minority, though, it is a problem when they are a very small minority. So in fact, initially gender diversity may have negative impact, so it is not sufficient, this is a policy piece, that you cannot only have a token woman part of the group. That's not addressing the problem. In terms of expertise recognition and evaluating performance, there is some differential expertise recognition by individuals and groups. So in a study that was done at the University of Illinois looking at science and engineering research teams, the researchers evaluated expertise recognition and utilization in science and engineering groups where women occupy high status positions in male-dominated work settings, right? So this is what's called incongruent status. And in fact, in these incongruous status situations, these high status, which means highly educated women with more advanced degrees, were not perceived as more expert relative to low status males. But this was not the same for males. In fact, high status males were in fact perceived as being significantly more expert than low status males, which is what we'd want to see happen. In fact, low-status females then were perceived as less expert to low-status males. So it didn't matter how much training and how much background and expertise you had. As a woman, you still couldn't be considered any more than the least amount of men that were there. And that's very problem. Importantly, gender emerged as a predictor of ratings lab members receive for research contributions. Women were rated lower by both men and women on their teams. Men and women. Women, we are accountable as well and cannot just point the finger at our male colleagues and blame them for all of the problems. Women, even a slight negative effect for being a female expert. Women with higher degrees got lower ratings than male experts and non-experts, as if you were being punished for being good and smart and an expert, and also a woman. Some other studies that were done then in the late 90s suggested why this might be the case. So they investigated gender composition of teams as it relates to performance. Members of a team that were gender heterogeneous perceived their teams to be less effective than members of homogeneous teams. But we now have more current research that says, in fact, you're more highly impactful. But how they viewed themselves, perhaps, as Kurt said, without the data, they were speculating or using conventional wisdom. Other studies also indicated that female team members were less well evaluated by outside members of the team when they constituted only a minority of the team. Now, thinking about this, some research was done just last year into understanding women's self-perceptions of accomplishment within collaboration and teams. Where am I on time? Oops. And recognize that group outcomes, right, which is really important, group outcomes are often evaluated as a whole, so that can obscure individual contribution. But in an academic setting, individual contribution and individual success is critically important for advancement, promotion, and tenure. Collaborative contexts, especially in traditionally male domains, sex-type jobs, which science and engineering laboratories are considered, that even in spite of successful group outcome, women working with men in teams were more likely than men to devalue their relative contribution and to choose their male teammates as better performers. The only way to overcome this devaluation by women themselves of their own accomplishments is when women were given direct individual feedback. You did an excellent job, Londa. You can take credit for that work. Women tend not to self-derogate, though, when they are working with other women. And so not being the minority, but having better diversity and balance of the genders is good for the teams. So in fact, we have to make sure that we don't have the denial of responsibility for success, because that then, they showed, is even more detrimental to women in their careers than long-term for men in their careers. The last area of research of team science and gender I want to focus on is collaboration strategies and networks. Some of this will be really new. It's unpublished results that my collaborators just told me about this week that gave me permission to present. But let's start with some work that was published in 2010 looking at gender as a predictive of network centrality. Network centrality matters. The more central you are to a network, the more you have the ability to share information, to serve often as a broker, to gather information from external sources. And in their studies, they demonstrated that men were 6 times more likely to be in highly central lab network positions. Now, it was so that women in expert positions could narrow that gap. And network centrality predicted important outcomes, such as the ratings individual received from fellow team members on the research contributions. So we start to get a sense of why women weren't being valued even for their expertise. It matters of where their centrality is in the network. Studies done by a colleague at Harvard University where he looked at the social network of internal co-authorship from the medical school there recognized that while reach of the network, the ability and the differences that you have, the different groups that you work with and collaborate with, it starts the same for both in men and women, but by age 35, just 5 years after they start looking at this, men already had network reaches that were consistently and significantly broader than that of women. And it's that network reach that's really important for the ability of men and women to be able to advance and to move their careers in the academic chain especially. The disparity of those network reaches continued to broaden, that gap continued over time, plateauing much earlier for women than it did for men, about 54 years old for women, and for men all the way up until 60. And some work that was just being finalized this week, being done at the University of Iowa, that they were able to demonstrate that within STEM networks, women must be more well-connected in their networks than men have to be in order to be deemed successful. Now, some ways that you can start to look at your own network and understand some of these things. If you don't already have a LinkedIn profile, I suggest that you get one. And thankfully, LinkedIn has this great free visualization tool called LinkedIn Maps. And so this is my LinkedIn map and my network reach. That green bubble over there are my Elsevier colleagues, which I told my boss meant that hiring me connected Elsevier to the rest of the research world. Little tongue-in-cheek, but he did send that to my boss's boss, so that was good. So you can demonstrate important things about your network by looking and visualizing your own. Also at Elsevier, we are partnering with universities in being able to use our research networking tools as a way to visualize networks. So the Chicago Collaboration for Women in STEM Expert Portals, which profiles women from 2 area universities and 2 Department of Energy national laboratories, allowed us and the institutions to do something that had never happened before, but that was to look at the collaboration that's happening between women and to get an understanding of how women are working together with other women across institutional boundaries, something that they wouldn't have been able to examine unless they had surveyed their faculty, and we know that that's not the best way to collect really great, accurate data. I like this quote: "Whatever women do, they must do twice as well as men to be thought of as half as good. Luckily, this is not difficult." I argue, however, that actually it's incredibly difficult. It is very difficult to work twice as hard to be recognized only as half as good, and that needs to stop. So the charge to all of us, there we go. Charge to all of us is that we have to do a better job of translating empirical evidence into policy and practice to be more informed by what we learn from the literature and use that, as Kurt started out in talking about our session, to drive the practice, the policy, and the processes. We need, first and foremost, more research to identify problems and the potential causes, but then we need research to help us develop interventions, doing the development and testing. And then we need outstanding forums to share information and effective practices across institutional and geographic boundaries. And first and foremost, we have to have a commitment to change. If you'd like to stay connected to the research that's being done in this field, you can join the Science of Team Science Listserv. It is an international community hosted by the National Institutes of Health. It's not a very busy, but it is a very good listserv. You can also decide to join us all in Austin, Texas, in the United States in August. I know it is a little hot in Austin, and I apologize, for the annual Science of Team Science Conference, where you can learn a lot more about gender, collaboration, and team science. And at the end, as you produce materials and you want to share those, I encourage you to take advantage of the Team Science Toolkit, which has become an amazing repository of all kinds of information, from tools to research to experts that you can take advantage of. And with that, I will say thank you and then turn it over to Kurt to take questions for the panel.